The kingdom of Floran, in the annex to the Viscount Jacques' estate. There was a girl. At the moment she was standing on the balcony, waiting for the food to be prepared. She was already very hungry, but it was a common thing for her to go hungry. So she went to a place that few people knew about, and usually no one came there. There was a well where she drew water and drank a little to suppress her hunger, because it was a prison for an illegitimate child. She is an illegitimate daughter, a disgrace to her family. No one took care of her. When her mother died, she completely lost the gift of speech. Her father came once every 6 months, or even less often. He accused her of not having been born, of being a stain on the family's reputation, and of living only because of her, otherwise she would not be here. If she hadn't been a substitute for her older sister, she would have been kicked out by now, and she wondered if anything would have changed if she hadn't been mute, if her life might have been different. Later, 3 maids burst into her room. They did not say a word, thus frightening the girl. As usually only one person brought food. They immediately began to beautify the girl, brought her new clothes and jewelry, and then took her with them. On the way to the estate, the girl already realized that something serious had happened there, and upon arrival, she immediately went to her father, who was already waiting for her. And by the look on his face, everything became clear. This day had come. The man said that the imperial army was coming, and the girl already knew what was required of her. Because that was why she had lived in a cage for 20 years. She had to replace her sister. The father handed the girl a dagger and assured her that before she fell into the hands of the soldiers, she had to kill herself, pierce her heart, and prove that she could still be useful. The girl was shocked by this news when her sister suddenly appeared, and her husband turned to her, saying that it was necessary, and the only way they could avoid the chase was to do so, and it was the only way to save her. Her sister wanted to be outraged by this, but her father did not even let her start, assuring her that she had to go to the carriage immediately. He took her with him by force, and Faye was left all alone, and she had already despaired. She knew that she was nothing more than a replacement, but she also wanted to feel love, or at least compassion. All she wanted was a little attention. In the morning, the soldiers came back and noticed the girl and decided to have fun with her, as they were sure that their commander would not punish them severely, even if he caught them. The commander-in-chief would just look around the main building and leave. He had nothing to do here. The heroine wanted to call for help, but it was all in vain. And she remembered the words of her father, who said that she should kill herself before she fell into the hands of the soldiers. And so now she was ready to pierce her heart. Now she didn't care, the pain, the sadness, and her whole life. She just had to be patient a little bit. And then it would be over. She remembered her mother, who always said she loved her child, and she in turn also loved her mother. Suddenly, out of nowhere, birds flew at the rapists and protected the girl. One of them became nervous, and then said that they had to run away in case she was caught. At this moment, the sword cut off the head of one of the attackers with one precise blow, and they all saw him in fear. The man wiping the blood from the sword, assured that by violating the order, they had to understand the consequences of their actions. The second attacker, on his knees, begged for forgiveness, but the man ruthlessly took his life, and then he looked at the girl, but finding nothing interesting, turned around and left. But the girl no longer wanted to be alone, and in despair clutched his cloak, in tears, wanting him to take her with him. 10 years ago, in order to destroy the Ploid Empire, 10 countries united and took up swords. But the long war still ended in the victory of the empire. All the opposing countries were punished, and the main figure in this event was the Lion of the Battlefield, Commander-in-Chief Max Warren. In the main hall, the commander and his deputy were looking for people, but no one was there, commenting that even a dog defends its home during an invasion, and here, everyone decided to run away. Without honesty and pride, nobles were no different from wild animals. Suddenly, the deputy heard something, and then assured him that he smelled blood, coming from the next room, where 2 people had committed suicide in the same way as the father had suggested to heroin. The man couldn't understand it. Why would they kill themselves if they weren't even soldiers? And so it seems to have been a substitution, after which he ordered to include Viscount in the list of fugitives. After finishing in the main hall, the men went out into the garden. It was filled with rare flowers that were very difficult to get in the empire. Making their way inside, the smell was getting stronger. And it was strange, since it should have smelled stronger near the main house. Suddenly, they noticed a bunch of birds circling the annex. An incredible phenomenon. Birds of different species gathered in one flock, and the commander was very interested in what could have made them unite. In one quick movement, he jumped onto the balcony, from which a bunch of birds were flying, and saw something not quite what he expected. The birds were chasing away the soldiers who were molesting the girl, and what he saw made him so angry that he killed both of his soldiers. He ordered the bodies to be taken outside the gate so that his beloved could beat them up, and at that moment a young girl grabbed his cloak, surprising both men. Any other commander would have broken his arm long ago, but he just pushed the girl away, and she hugged him again in desperation, praying in her head that he would not leave her, because she did not want to be alone. The deputy already realized that there would probably be another corpse, and no one remained intact after such impudence. He wanted to take her away, but the commander ordered him not to touch her. He was assessing her. She looked like a mentally retarded child, as a healthy person would immediately realize that he was the enemy. He also remembered that the Viscount's daughter had never been found, so he took her by the hair and lifted her head so that he could see her better. The man could not understand whether she was just stupid or fake, but the heroine just moved her lips, trying to ask him to take her with him. Later, in the king's bedroom, the girl was sleeping on his lap, and the man was thinking about the whole situation. The girl grabbed hold of him with her hands and did not let go even when she was sleeping. And that's how they ended up in the bedroom. He didn't know what to do with her now. After a defeat in a war, aristocrats usually gave their soldiers as a contribution, but now that the kingdom's power had been overthrown, no one cared whether they were aristocrats or commoners, and so this child's fate was already sealed. The companion asked to give the child to him if the commander did not need her, assuring that he felt sorry for her. His name was Carl Jaden, and he was a knight commander who blew the heads of enemies with his mace, and also a leopard, good at silent attacks. And it was strange that such a person felt pity for her. He asked to give her back, but there was not a drop of pity in his eyes. The commander was sure that he did not want to pity her, and on closer inspection, he began to look away and sweat. In an instant, the man pulled out his sword and ordered him to speak, and if he didn't hear a normal answer, he would beat him. In fear, the captain of the knights admitted that he just liked her smell, as if she had a very pleasant aroma. But the leader could only smell earth and blood, and in a moment he forbade the boy to approach her. He was not afraid to give his subordinate a slave, but to abuse them was unacceptable, and he could not allow such behavior, no matter how close they were. To calm down his subordinate, the man again intimidated him, assuring him that he would make it so that he could not move on his own 2 feet if he did not shut up, after which he sadly left. A butler came to his room to replace him, and the man ordered to take the girl to prison. But after a moment of thought, he abandoned this idea and sent the servant away. He was still looking at her and wondered how she could have fallen for him so easily, and did not even realize that he was an enemy. She was sleeping quite nicely on it, and he decided not to wake her up, but just took off the jacket she was holding onto and carried her to the bed. It all happened on a whim. People who can't take responsibility were truly horrible. He put the girl on the bed and lay down next to her, looking at her. He wondered how this could have happened. It had been 9 years since he decided to end the war, and so he had not slept with a girl in the same bed for a long time. The heroine dreamed about the first time she saw blood. It was a hot summer day. She was taking off her sweat-soaked clothes and noticed a red spot. At first, she didn't understand what it was, but when she moved her hand along her wet thigh, she saw blood. The girl really wanted to ask someone what had happened, but there were almost never any people around her. She began to panic, as she did not know what to do. The blood did not stop, and she had already decided that she was seriously ill. Suddenly, she met her sister, but the meeting was completely accidental, and the sister, seeing Faye crying, decided to help her. She took her to the well, undressed her, and began to help her wash, while telling her that this was a very common phenomenon that all women face, and so she should not be afraid next time. It was their first and last conversation, and now she wondered why her sister had looked at her so strangely at that last moment when they saw each other. Lying in bed, the girl was very comfortable and did not want to wake up, when suddenly she felt something warm and hard, and in a moment realizing that something was wrong, she opened her eyes and saw a naked man in front of her. The heroine immediately recognized him as the man who had killed the two offenders, and the man noticed that she was no longer sleeping. So he took her by the hands and violently lifted her up, asking where the Viscount was now. He was still holding her hands, and the heroine had already resigned herself to her fate. She didn't know where he had gone, and even if she did, she wouldn't tell him. She didn't want her father to be unhappy. And although he had abandoned her, he had no other choice because that was the plan from the beginning. The man only angrily said that he knew she was useless, and the heroine understood this. It seemed she really was useless, and so she knew perfectly well what would happen next. This man would either leave her or lock her up. The best that a person like her could hope for was to wait for the moment when she would be useful. And in a moment, she noticed that she hadn't heard anyone speak for a long time, let alone when they were addressing her. And although the man wanted to know where her father was, he had saved her anyway, and for that she should thank him. And so she smiled at him as sincerely as she could, and you could read gratitude in her eyes, and it surprised him. On the same day, the commander-in-chief received a letter from the emperor himself, stating that the reward he would receive for 10 years of defense of the country was the title of Duke, 2,000 slaves, and wealth. Still, he already had money and slaves, and the fact that imperial servants were sent to him meant that he could now be watched, which infuriated him, since this was what they called a reward. But on the other hand, if the crown prince had not given him the elixir, the man would have died 10 years ago, so this award was fully deserved, but still it may not be enough. The Marquis of Warren was an imperialist completely. After the crown prince saved him, Warren's loyalty became even greater, and even if the emperor decided to abandon him, he would not protest. But people might think that such a reward would be too small, and then the emperor's authority would be shaken. The Marquis told the envoy to tell the emperor that the commander-in-chief would see him after he had dealt with Florin, and that was all. The envoy was given a room so that he could have a good rest, and they said goodbye. He could not get out of his mind the girl he had taken from the Viscount's house, and he thought she had thanked him, and perhaps in that situation he had saved her, but she was clearly not worth thanking for that. She couldn't speak, and apparently she had intellectual disabilities, so he thought there was no point in killing her. She was not intelligent, and therefore shouldn't cause any problems. His thoughts were interrupted by Carl, who wanted to talk about that girl again, and the Marquis noticed that he talked about her a lot, and so he asked if he was planning to do something bad to her. The subordinate assured him that this was not true, and he would like to take care of her from the bottom of his heart, to which the commander said that he did not know exactly why he needed her, but what he did know was that Carl was not the kind of person who was willing to lend a helping hand, and so there must have been some ulterior motive, or perhaps he just wanted to eat her. In any case, the man forbade her to touch her, assuring her that in a few days everyone would forget about her, and gossip would be a bad thing if an adult man took such a young girl in. The captain resigned himself to the gentleman's decision, and only said that although he was not sure since it was the first time he had felt such a thing, perhaps this child was of elven blood. Perhaps it was not true, but it was said that beastmen could smell the unique scent of elves. And then the Marquis remembered that he knew about elves, that they could hear the sounds of nature and communicate with animals, and that they were unusually beautiful. But they began to hide from people because they began to hunt them. Then that flock of birds came to the rescue, because it could have elven blood in it. And even half-breeds are very valuable. And if it has even a drop of this blood, it will be useful. And not direct ancestors can find use for it, so it was necessary to return it. Sitting in the cage, the heroine fell into reflection. She considered herself a fool, and all because this man reminded her of her father, and therefore she should not have kept hoping that he would return for her, and therefore there was no point in even dreaming about it. She didn't choose to be born or not, but her very existence became a sin. She was a shackle that held her mother and a thorn in her father's side, and so she would definitely be abandoned again. The girl did not know what would happen to her. It would be so painful to die, but maybe it would be easier, Her life would not get better anyway. And suddenly she heard a voice ordering her to raise her head. The man ordered her to follow him, and she went along without understanding why. He said she was useless, and although it was not clear why he returned, even his father would not have done that. It was very strange. She had learned from her own experience that waiting only brings pain. But then why was her heart pounding so hard? Maybe it was just because he had spoken to her, or because he had returned. Maybe she could be of some use. He had saved her anyway, no matter what the reason, and so it didn't matter if she died later. She had to help him somehow. So she grabbed his coat and tried to thank him again with a sincere smile. The man said that he understood her because he could read lips, and the girl was puzzled by this because her father could not. And therefore all conversations were always one-sided, which meant that now she had someone to talk to. The Marquis decided to ask a few questions, and the girl was only happy to talk to someone. And the first question was whether she could talk to animals, and the girl no longer understood what was going on, saying that she could not, or rather had no idea about it. The next question was whether she understood why he had brought her along, and she modestly assured him that she could be useful to him. And the Marquis added that if she did not know how to communicate with animals, then she would have to look for other options. This upset the girl, and she confirmed that she could not communicate with animals, and she could not speak either. She could write a little, but she had studied for a long time, so she knew only the basic things. After that, the question was asked what she could do, and the heroine lowered her head and assured that she could be alone. It made no sense. Even she realized it, but she could do nothing else. The man interrupted the awkward moment and assured her that she shouldn't jump to conclusions, whether it was a person or a thing. There was a use for everything, and she was happy about it, but it was too early. The Marquis looked at her with disdain and said that she was a slave, and therefore she had to do her best, and therefore she had to be a loyal and devoted person. But if she was of no use to him, he would send her to Karl, and until then, she would be his servant. Later, one of the maids was assigned to wash the girl, as she would be working in the Marquis's room, and the woman was very interested in how she managed to do it, as there were gossips that he was gay or impotent. But in that case, why did he choose this girl? She turned to the heroine asking if she was the Marquis's new maid, since workers like her did their work for money, but with personal servants it was different, and the woman realized that the girl could only be a night maid. She continued to instruct the young slave, assuring her that a maid should be sensitive to her master's feelings, and she should also be able to flirt and always look good. Suddenly, the girl, delighted with what she had heard, turned sharply to the woman, saying that her heart was jumping out of her chest at the thought of how many new people she would see. She might not know what flirtation was, but she would like to feel the same sense of care that her father and sister had, and so she would do anything for it. The heroine asked him to explain to her about all these matters. The woman could also read lips, and therefore understood the young servant, and began to evaluate the girl. She was not the first beauty, and she was also very thin. The Marquis may have strange tastes, but she is unlikely to last long. The woman said that men usually like to sit on their laps and flirt, but the Marquis had been at war for a long time, and it was better for her not to cross the line. The advice went on to say that you should memorize every detail about your master, what he likes and dislikes. You should observe what he needs, and most importantly, you should be loyal, and in no case experience unnecessary feelings. Soon after, a neat girl came to the room. The man was surprised by this, as he thought that she should have already been told where to go for the night, but it seems that everyone decided that the girl would be a night maid. The heroine sat down on the gentleman's lap, as she had recently been taught, and the gentleman hugged her. He did not understand whether she was just naive or pretending, so he did not tempt fate and pushed her away. The girl was embarrassed, and then she started rubbing her head, and at that moment it hit the Marquis that she just wanted to be petted. It was so strange that it was even stupid. He could never have thought that she would ask to be petted. In any case, it was too late to call the servants, and so they would have to follow her to find out all the details, so they would stay together for a while. He threw a pillow and a bedspread on the ground and ordered her to sleep, but she surprisingly took it literally and laid down right on the ground. The man wanted to start getting indignant, but she had already fallen asleep. laid down without even thinking. She had clung to him without thinking the first time she met him. That evening, the commander fell asleep very easily. He could not remember when he could fall as easily as that. And the next day, the heroine was taught how to behave at the table, so she was taught that she should not eat with her hands, take cutlery, and always wipe her face with a napkin. The girl immediately did what she was told, and the man began to understand who he was dealing with. She understood everything, but she was not socialized and did not know the norms of behavior. He told her to change her clothes, and she immediately began to do so, and also tried to eat what fell on the floor. The man continued to evaluate her. Perhaps she was an illegitimate child, and that would explain everything. She looked like the girl in the portrait, and it seemed as if she had been raised as a disposable double in inhumane conditions. It wasn't like she was an elf. No one was taking care of her, and she couldn't even think of running away. She was just waiting for her death, a stupid and naive child. But anyway, we need to teach her at least something to make her useful. And so he took her to his chamberlain, and he ordered him to teach her everything, starting with the most basic skills. And he ended by saying that from now on, the chamberlain would be responsible for her as long as she was there. When her new teacher left the room, he looked at her angrily and wondered if she was a night servant. But she was a day servant, and he was suddenly overcome with envy. Why do some people need to work hard to get a job with the Marquis? And why did she only need to be born an aristocrat? Why did he even allow such a girl to share his bed with him, since she was dumb and unable to do anything? He struck her, accusing her of being a slave of a defeated nation, of looking at her with such pride, and so she was punished for her rude behavior. The Marquis is only harsh on knights, and so it is better to show her her place right away before she gets around him. Then he kicks her again and says he will do everything to make sure she doesn't live here anymore. A few days passed, and the guy said it was time to go over the material he had learned. So he asked her what he had taught her yesterday, but she didn't answer. So he ordered her to speak immediately in a louder tone. The heroine was very afraid, and he looked at her gloatingly and decided to help her. She had to say, "Please manage a nobody like me." The girl didn't even look at him, and he just said that she didn't understand anything until she was hit, and as soon as she was going to serve the master. The boy said that she would better keep quiet about the punishment if she didn't want to be kicked out, and that she shouldn't even hope that he would chew on it and explain it. So she would sit here and think about what she had done wrong. And then he left the room. The heroine was hurt and scared, but she was even more afraid that no one would need her again, and why she was useless no matter how hard she tried. At that moment, Carl entered the room and noticed the girl, and asked if she was alone and where the gentleman had gone. He wagged his tail, and this interested the girl very much, and she could not help but grab it, wondering if it was really a tail. The captain went down on one knee and assured her that it was dangerous to catch the tail like that, and when she saw the cat's ears, she was even more delighted. It was the first time she had seen a beastman. Beastmen are creatures with features of both humans and animals. They are stronger and faster than an ordinary person, and his particular name was Carl. He is a leopard and also a servant of their master. He asked that he could call her Miss Fay, after which he warned that one should not pull the tail of beastmen so carelessly. It is very rude behavior, and at that moment the heroine let him go. The heroine began to worry, as she did not know what to do in this situation. As it was rude behavior, she expected him to behave like a chamberlain, which means he would hit her. But there was no punch. Instead, he took her hands and said that now he had to look after her, as taking someone by the tail meant love at first sight, and that a person wants to live with the one they took by the tail, and even the rulers of countries cannot break their relationship. Before he could finish speaking, someone slapped his tail with a terrible force, and Carl turned around and saw the Marquis, who wanted to know better what the word care meant. The man said that he had warned him that he was not allowed to approach her, but the beastman suddenly remembered that he had very urgent business to attend to, and so he jumped out of the window. The girl wanted to warn him that it was very high up here, but by the time she ran to the window, the captain was already quite far away, and she was sincerely delighted with his speed and shared this with the Pan, but he assured her that he could do it too. The heroine then asked if they were all wizards, but he said something close to it. Swordmasters could destroy an entire army in just a minute, and he was much better than some mage who needed to read some spell for a long time. After he finished, he warned her to be careful with Carl because he was a pervert. The heroine did not know this word, so the man condescendingly explained to her that it meant that the person was bad. The Marquis was angry, as he had clearly given orders not to approach her, but he came secretly in his absence, and all just because of the smelling her hair. The man smelled only soap, so he thought that only bestiality was capable of this. Later, a little later, he showed the girl how to knit a shawl, but she was not able to do it properly, so he showed her again, and then finally, she managed to do it correctly. When he finished, he praised her and assured her that she would do better if she tried harder, after which the Marquis was surprised that he had even given her a person to teach her. But she still did poorly, although she learned quickly with him. It seems the problem was with Cameron, and he probably neglected her, but if she still can't handle something like this, there's no point in keeping her, whether she's capable or not. Walking along the corridor, Carl was talking to an aging man, and he told him that the Beastman had been called a pervert, to which the man was outraged, asking how he could be called a pervert and who said such a thing. The man confirmed this and asked what he wanted to do with this girl if what he said was not true, to which the captain reminded him that he only wanted to help this child sincerely. But they didn't believe him and claimed that he hadn't been joking with this innocent child, and he and the Marquis were the same, since he had taken the girl and made her a night servant. But when he was told that the girl was not a night girl but a day girl, he was visibly surprised at how this was possible if they were sharing a bed, after which they agreed that she would not have looked so unharmed if she were a night girl, and he was far from being a gentleman in that regard. But this was all strange because he hadn't had anyone for 10 years, so why would someone who didn't look at women suddenly decide to use a bed with one of them? But he felt sorry for his captive, even though he was indifferent to everyone else. Since it was such a case, Carl asked the man to put in a good word with the commander so that he would lift the ban on approaching the girl, since the Marquis would not listen to him. The Beastman claimed that she reminded him of his younger sister, whom he sees in his dreams, and the man was seriously interested in the reason why these two were going so crazy over her. The man assured them that they had to go to the Marquis, and Carl said that he was in a meeting and was not in his office. But in a moment he realized what the man was hinting at, and happily assured them that if they were caught, it was not his idea, and he was not to blame. Upon entering the room, they saw a disappointing picture. A chamberlain holding a cloth was punishing a girl, and she was humbly sitting on her knees. As soon as the pseudo-teacher realized that he had been exposed, he immediately began to make excuses, claiming that they were having a lesson. But she did not want to listen, so he had to be more strict. Carl did not appreciate it, and did not understand what could be learned by beating. He dared to mock someone he liked, and therefore he had to be punished. And so he received a strong blow on the legs. The chamberlain fell to his knees, and the Beastman instructed him, as if he had forgotten that he had to greet first, and did not even know such basic rules, and therefore it was he who had to learn here. Ashamed, the guy looked at the girl with hatred and blamed her for everything, after which Carl took him by the shoulder and threatened him that if he used such methods again, he would not leave him in one piece. Having chased him away, an older man approached the girl, asking how she was feeling, and she assured him that she had been beaten only with a rag. So it didn't hurt. She was being punished because she didn't follow orders. But it was very nice that someone cared about her. After that, the man decided to treat the girl to berries, and she looked at them uncertainly. She had been taught to serve tea and snacks, but not whether she could eat herself, and so now she did not know what to do. But in the end, the heroine gave in to the man's request and ate them right out of his hands, and to her surprise, everything was very tasty and a little sour. And noticing this, the man got more, assuring her that he himself loved these berries, but would give them away today. He thought she would look more like a fox, but she was just a naive child, and would she be okay if she stayed with Warren? And then the animal man came up behind him and sniffed him happily, and now he understood why the Marquis had forbidden him to come near her. Later, after the meeting, Carl left the room and met the intruder in the corridor. And immediately a difficult moment came when they met eyes, and the captain showed that he was watching him and that he should not do any more suspicious actions, after which he turned around and left. The humiliated Chamberlain was left alone, and he was terribly annoyed. He couldn't calm down after they all saw it. He beat her gently, but sooner or later everyone would find out about it anyway. He didn't admit his guilt, so he decided to just get rid of the girl. On the same day, he told the commander that she was failing, claiming that she was stupid, and that it was impossible to teach her anything, and therefore there was no point in continuing the lessons. All this time, the Marquis was looking at her, waiting for at least some reaction, but she decided not to react, which meant that she would be useless, so he could give her to Carl, or use her as bait against the other beastmen. Anyway, the man said that he was not going to keep her for long and would soon send her to someone else, but until then, he ordered her to continue her studies, and that was the end of it. The heroine guessed that the owner would listen to him, and now she thought she was a complete fool. He said that she could take her time and become useful, but it couldn't last forever. He didn't need her. She didn't want to part with him. She just wanted to be close to him, but she shouldn't beg him for that, otherwise he would hate her. Some time passed. The girl learned to serve, and reluctantly fell into reflection, as expected. She was not supposed to be here in the first place. She hoped that she would be useful if she was a servant, but she could be useful if she was sent to someone else, so there was no other choice. The cameraman praised her at the end, as she was doing much better, and she was doing it faster. But in his head he already realized that one praise would not change anything, and he could not wait for it to disappear. He looked at the door with one eye, and realized that the two would most likely not be there today, as they were busy with a meeting, and he wondered what such high-ranking people saw in her, a mute servant. In a moment, a plan appeared in his head, and coming closer, he said that he would not beat her, but just wanted to teach her something, and so he decided to tell her in secret how to ask the owner to leave her. But the heroine instantly threw away the hand that was on her shoulder, assuring that she did not need it. And with such impudence, he grabbed her hands and threw her on the table, saying that she should not refuse help. Or did she still want the owner to leave her? Suddenly behind him, an angry voice asked what he was doing here. The guy immediately turned around, knowing that Carl was supposed to be preparing. But the captain repeated the question right in his face. This encounter made the teacher seriously nervous, and looking for a reason to justify himself, he saw the dishes and claimed that their lesson was already over, and he just wanted to pick up the dishes, and if that was all, he would leave. Carl decided to leave him for now, and in turn approached the girl. As he was now concerned about something else, the heroine was happy to see him, and greeted him by calling him subordinate, and noting that he came late today. The beast man asked how many times he had raised his hand to her, and the girl started counting. As it was from the first time she met him, Carl was horrified as soon as he realized it. She saw the worried expression on his face and immediately apologized, while he held back his rage and gently said that he was not angry with her and that she was not to blame. Now he was angry with himself. He was inattentive, and he thought that she would handle it herself, and he knew perfectly well that Pan did not care about such things, and therefore it was all his fault. The girl took him by the cloak and apologized again, and asked him to keep it a secret from the owner. And he wondered why it was necessary to keep it secret. And the girl assured him that if she was found out, the owner would kick her out. Suddenly, at that moment he realized, he pulled up her sleeves and was horrified to see that she was covered in bruises, and there were even more bruises under her clothes. After which he asked if it was the servant who said that she would be kicked out if they found out about the beating. The guy was overcome with incredible rage, ready to tear him to pieces. He hit him in places that were not visible, and he also blackmailed her. So he took her by the hands and assured her that she should do only one thing, namely, follow the orders of her master. The Chamberlain was not her master, and there was no point in hiding it from the master. And in any case, no one should be allowed to touch her except the master, and what the Chamberlain said. But that was later. First, it was necessary to heal her wounds. Later, they were in the Marquis's office, and Carl told her that she was very lucky, and if he hadn't shown up on time, there would have been problems, so she should at least demote him. The man listened carefully and began to understand what was going on. He gave him a chance, but he had crossed the line, and those who have done this once will not stop again. So he assured him that he would have to replace him, as he would have to return soon anyway, so he would not need a chamberlain for now, and therefore he would order him not to come to his room anymore. The same night, the heroine couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about the Chamberlain. She was told that he would be gone for a while, and she hadn't seen him herself since yesterday. But it was better to let the classes last longer, and if not, they would meet soon. She looked at the sleeping master and realized that she wanted to touch him. She knew that their separation was inevitable, but still, she wanted to be with him as long as possible. That night, he had a restless sleep, and he was even sweating heavily, and she remembered how her mother had once died in such circumstances, and so she took a rag with the intention of wiping him. As soon as the canvas touched him, he instinctively woke up and grabbed her hands, intending to neutralize her. She saw the rage and immediately apologized, accepting all the blame. He was very angry, and she knew it, but she didn't know what to do in this situation, and it seemed like he might throw her out even sooner, so she started crying, blaming herself for everything. A moment later, when he recovered from his sudden awakening, he saw the rag and realized his mistake. She only wanted to wipe him, so he asked her to come to him. He gently hugged her, saying that he had scared her a lot, and that he would not do it again. The heroine touched him and said only that before her mother died, she was also covered in sweat, and that was why she was very worried and hoped that he would understand how much she was worried about him. From that day on, she was constantly busy, and now she was doing it all day long. The servants had so much work, but nevertheless she was glad. Carl said that he and several servants he knew would treat her. She wouldn't have worked alone if it weren't for her subordinate. She couldn't even dream of it. Good people have always been surrounded by other good people. Whether it's the owner, Carl, or his subordinates, they are all good people. And she was only asked to follow her master's wishes, but she couldn't even do that. It wasn't enough for her to know that he was okay. She wanted to be with him incredibly badly. In a moment, she pushed the bad thoughts out of her head, knowing that she just needed to be grateful that he had saved her and not want anything more. Just do her job and not upset her master. On the way, she met two guys. They were waiting for her, and when they got there, they grabbed her and dragged her away, and in her place, there was only a bucket with a rag and the footprints left there. They took her to the garden so that no one would find them, and they said that it was quite difficult to catch her. And she was horrified to realize that she recognized that voice. One of the attackers was Kamerger. He blamed her for all his troubles, not believing that he had lost his position because of such nonsense. She could not speak, and therefore could not shout either, and they were sure that there would be no problems. No one would look for a slave from another country. They claimed to have heard that she had conquered the captain of the knights and the commander-in-chief, and therefore mockingly assured her that she had powers. Grabbing her shoulder, the heroine remembered Carl's words when he said that she should not allow herself to be touched, and so she bit his hand. At that moment, she was hit, and she fell to the ground, all in tears, realizing that she didn't want to die. She had just found someone dear to her heart, and that's why she became greedy, and that's why she just wanted to live. Suddenly, all the horses seemed to go crazy, and the girl's owner noticed this and was visibly surprised. But in a moment he remembered what it could mean if the animals got angry for no reason. And when he noticed the bucket with the rag, he had no doubts. He caught them beating the girl, realizing that they had been exposed. The boys were terribly frightened, and the man and the girl exchanged glances that could be understood. The heroine noticed him and ran desperately to him. He just looked at her and knew everything. Faye cried a lot. She didn't know even the most basic things, and she was so weak that she was even annoying. And besides, he was not kind to her, much less gentle. But as soon as he saw that her fragile body was suffering even a little bit, he began to worry a lot, and so he hugged her tightly. And with one precise movement, he ended the life of the villains. The slave woke up in the bed of the Marquis, who was sitting next to her all the time, waiting for her to wake up. And when she realized what position she was in, she began to cry again, not wanting a person dear to her to see her in this state. The man gently asked her to come to him, and she agreed. And he put her on his lap and asked her how she felt and what had happened today. She did not let him finish, but only blamed herself for all this, and asked him not to leave her. She begged him to do so and claimed that she just wanted to be with him, and she did not want another master. The commander did not understand this because she should not have seen him. She would not have suffered if he had not helped her then, but she did not care. He hugged her, and no one had hugged her before, and she had no one but him. She could not believe that she had said everything she thought. And so she added, asking what she needed to do to be his servant. She was ready to do anything. The Marquis simply hugged the girl in silence and began to teach her, saying that in the future she should not talk to strangers, should not trust anyone but him. And even if they say that it is his order, she should believe only because she hears it personally from him. So she fell asleep in his arms, and he began to wonder when he began to feel responsible for a person he was only supposed to use. But now it didn't matter. It was so strange when she was in danger, and you could see in her eyes that she was instinctively looking for him. He felt relieved, and these feelings grew like branches, as if they would soon cover the sky. The next day, he and his commanders discussed current affairs. It had been a week since the attack, so it was time for everyone to leave, and the Marquis ordered them to return to the estate. Carl was overjoyed by this news and asked if he could take Faye to his estate, as he wanted to go alone. But the commander interrupted his joy, assuring him that the plans had changed. He couldn't let her go alone, especially after those words. Everyone was happy for her loyalty, but it was dangerous to go to the imperial palace together, so she suggested that he change his mind. The commander said that he would go first, and they should take care of the soldiers, and then left the tent and turned to the captain of the knights, ordering him to lead the Warren Knights and go first to the estate. The Marquis intended to return no sooner than 2 months later, as he had to wait for the victory celebration, because he had to keep an eye on the imperial family. In the next tent, the heroine was sleeping right on the floor, and the moment the owner came, she woke up happy, assuring him that the bed was ready, but he thought it was okay if they spent the night together, and so he ordered it. She reached out to him, and the man was confused because he didn't understand what she was doing. She just wanted to take off her clothes, but he thought she was going to hug him, and then he laughed nervously because he couldn't believe he had thought of such a stupid thing. Night fell, and they fell asleep next to each other. The man, unlike the heroine, did not sleep. He was pleased to feel her body temperature gradually rise, and he could not remember ever feeling like that. He remembered how she had sincerely admitted that no one had ever hugged her before, and he realized that he was exactly the same. So he did it now. She said she liked to hug, and now he was beginning to understand her. In the morning, she could only hear a soft voice that allowed her to sleep a little more. It was the voice of the owner. His hand was very warm, and suddenly realizing everything, she opened her eyes and saw him in front of her. Her first thoughts were that it was a dream. She didn't know why the owner was acting like this, but he only assured her that she could rest until he called her, and then they would go wash together. She felt an unfamiliar sensation, and she couldn't know why her heart was pounding so hard now. She felt like she was suffocating, and although she was in pain, she wanted to feel it a little more, when suddenly her dreams were interrupted, assuring her that it was time to wake up. They set off together on the same horse. The Marquis replaced the carriage with a horse because the road here is not easy, but Faye began to feel bad when the horse got tired, but she did not show it. And he was proud of her for pretending that everything was fine and enduring. He said that soon they would be near the border, and they would ride a little more, and then they would rest. The owner understood that the connection with the animal was certainly beautiful, but it was not much use, and in any case, if they did not stop, the girl might get sick, and so they had to take a carriage. He stopped at the first suitable place and helped her down. Sitting on a rock, he massaged her leg, assuring her that it would soon be easier. The heroine began to blush and feel embarrassed, and the Marquis, while kneading her leg, unintentionally began to raise his hand higher and higher, and when he reached almost to her thigh, the tension rose so high that he unintentionally pinched her, which made her ouch, and realizing his mistake, he left, saying that she could sleep until they started to drive. In the meantime, a meeting of high-ranking aristocrats was taking place in the capital, where it was reported that Marquis Warren would soon be in the capital, and although he had shown himself well, they realized that he would only cause problems here. They couldn't let that happen, but since he was a good knight, it wasn't that easy to get rid of him. The Duke of Lightman was in charge of the table, and he decided what to do next. The previous Marquis of Warren, who was the Emperor's sword and shield, died, and the new one will return as a war hero who defeated the army of 10 countries and doubled the territory of the empire. This will definitely go down in history, because after he returns, the entire elite that has ruled for 10 years will have to step down, and so they could not allow this to happen. And so they decided to send an assassin after him, since he would probably be traveling unaccompanied. And if he failed, it could always be disguised as an attack by the rest of the army. And since he had many enemies, he would not suspect anything. Night came, and they stayed at a hotel, and the owner of the place met them and apologized for not warning them about this visit. Otherwise, they would have been better prepared, and assured them that if they needed anything, they should call him. He would be there in a minute. The owner was assessing his guests. In front of him was the Marquis of Warren, and soon perhaps the Duke, as he was to receive a new title. Not only an honorable man, but also very handsome. All the secular society was saying that he was coming soon, and the owner suddenly had a plan. If the Marquis became close to his daughter and he wanted a status higher than some Margrave, the question was what to do. Sitting in his room, drinking wine, the man thought that after the war ended, he had become a free man, and therefore there was hardly any need to cling to such a young girl. And at that moment, a practically naked girl came into his room, and without saying a word, she began to hit on him, and for a moment he gave in to his weakness and began to kiss her. She did not have the same calluses as the maids. When he returned to his senses, he chased her away. The girl did not understand what was happening, but the irritated Marquis only asked, since when the Count's daughter served guests at night, and so ordered her to leave. After he got dressed, he went to the heroine's room, but she was sleeping peacefully, and he had to wake her up by picking her up, assuring her that he understood how tired she was, but she had to be patient for a while, as it would be better to stay somewhere else. And in a moment he realized that he no longer understood who was the boss. In the next hotel, my husband asked if they had any double rooms, and was told that they only had single rooms left, and that they would not find better than here, as this hotel is the best in the city. And although it is a single room, it is very spacious. They came here because annoying things were happening in the others. But there were only single rooms around. But it was late, and it would be hard to find something better. So they didn't have to choose. And the Marquis rented a room. After that, he turned to the heroine and praised her for enduring. But a moment later, sensing something was wrong, he ordered her to be here. And although she wanted to go with him, he did not allow her, assuring her that she could not go with him. But there was no time for talk. He left her unconscious with one precise movement and gently laid her on the bed, and irritated, he took out his sword, realizing that rats appear at such a time. He drew his sword, and suddenly the roof broke over him, from which several people dressed in black descended, and they pissed him off. But he was grateful that thanks to them, he no longer had to pretend that he had important things to do. It all happened quickly. In a flash, all but 2 of the killers were dead. And those who were still alive were so scared that they could not stand up. They realized that it was impossible to kill the man in front of them, and 10 would not be enough because he was not human. The Marquis was happy that he had managed to let off steam on someone, and so he gave them 2 options, one to die in agony, and the other to die a less painful death. But they just had to say whose orders it was, and he would finish them off gently. One of them hesitantly said, "I appel." And at the same moment his head flew off his shoulders, and the man assured him that he would not believe in such nonsense. This country had been destroyed by him to the last stone, and so he gave him one last chance. A little later everything was already over, and the swordmaster already knew that the Aristocrats Association had done it. And if they had already started sending assassins, he had to hurry to the palace. Several days passed, and they were still on the road. And the girl seemed to be getting worse, and the man asked her to be patient a little longer, as they were about to reach the village. The murderers have been attacking them for 15 days, and even the army cannot withstand this number of attacks. So it is not surprising that the girl is barely holding on. It would be better if she complained a little, said that it was hard for her. When they got to the village, they stopped at the next hotel, and the man gave the girl medicine, assuring her that she would get better. The Marquis realized that they would have to take a short break. He certainly didn't like fighting off the killers all the time, but Faye would die of exhaustion at this rate. She fell asleep right in his arms, and he wanted to put her to sleep. But for a moment they were face to face, and he tried to kiss her. But at the last moment he restrained himself and put his hand over her. The next day, they decided to walk around the local market, and the girl was delighted to look around. But the Marquis blamed himself for what had happened recently, realizing that he was just comfortable with her, and therefore all sorts of stupid thoughts were coming into his head. But there was no other choice. He couldn't leave her alone because they were constantly being attacked, so he would have to endure until they returned to Warren. He noticed that the girl was looking intently at one place, and there was a sign that said desserts, so he went and bought some sweet candy, which he fed to her. He put them directly into her mouth, and realized that she had probably never tasted candy before, so he explained that she should slowly suck on them and not chew them, after which she said that it was the first time she had ever eaten something so sweet, and so the man gave her all the candy, but she decided to share and put one in his mouth. After that, the commander immediately withdrew and realized that she seemed to think it was cute, so she did the same. But gathering his strength, he ordered her not to eat too much sweets, otherwise her appetite would be ruined. Suddenly, the girl stopped and began to move her legs, and when asked what happened, she said that she was bleeding, and so the owner did not hesitate to put his cloak on her. And although she assured him that his clothes could get dirty, he assured her that everything was fine, and so he took her in his arms and carried her to a clean place. Already at the hotel, she had washed, and he helped her dry herself. He already knew that she was enduring all the time, and apparently she was used to living like this, and so he put her to bed, telling her that he would be close. They lay down together, and the heroine fell asleep easily, while the Marquis looked at her and thought that now he would have been better off choosing a couple of killers, since only bloodshed could distract him. A few days later, having hired a carriage, they arrived in the capital, and at the entrance there were two guards who asked what business they had come on, and the man introduced himself as the Marquis of Warren and carried out His Majesty's orders. The soldiers present rejoiced and began to welcome him back, and they went on calmly, and when he arrived at the palace addressing the local servants, he asked them to take care of Frey, and then went inside. One of the maids immediately began to ask what their relationship with the Marquis was. But the heroine did not answer, but began to write. And when she took the piece of paper, she was visibly surprised that the aristocrat had taken a mute to his place. The maid was immediately taken over by the older woman, who told her that she was important to the Marquis, and therefore needed to be shown respect, although she herself could not understand how she had gotten a job with the imperial family in the first place, since the Marquis was nicknamed the Lion of the Battlefield for a reason, and it seems that his kindness was limited to this servant. Meanwhile, the Marquis himself knelt down beside the Emperor, claiming that he had fulfilled the order, and the latter was pleased with this result, and therefore declared that the Marquis of Warren had not changed at all, although he could now be called a duke. He was both pleased and saddened by the fact that the shield of the empire had gone to war, and he asked if the hero had seen his decree and what he thought of it. The man assured him that if it had not been for the crown prince, he would have been dead long ago, and therefore he could feel nothing but gratitude, and the emperor asked him to raise his head, as he was not comfortable talking to him in this way, after which he began to cough abruptly. Hearing this, the Marquis began to worry, and so he asked how sick he was, and with sadness in his eyes, the emperor said that he did not have long to live, and because of his deteriorating health, the power of the aristocrats had increased. And now he was going to put a prince on the throne, but he realized that he was not ready now. The man assured him that there was nothing to worry about, and that he would have the prince ready in a month. But the ruler refused, saying that the prince had to figure it out for himself, and if he couldn't, he didn't deserve the crown anyway. But in any case, he was too tired to continue this conversation and asked him to leave. Meanwhile, everyone in the city already knew that the war hero had returned, and so they were eager to see him, and in the evening a ball was organized, where everyone also paid attention to the man. From the very beginning, he was surrounded by people who were eager to talk to him, but he didn't seem to be interested in it. He was only annoyed. He thought about Faye, as it was the first time she was staying with strangers, and so he was a little worried. Suddenly, new guests attracted people's attention. Duke Lightman appeared, and Manhwa Lightman appeared with him. He was the heir to his family's duke title. He is a high-level knight, but inside he is a mean person, and therefore it is better not to cross paths with him. Suddenly he heard a girl's voice asking if the hero of the occasion was coming, and he turned around and saw a beautiful girl standing in front of him, who introduced herself as Rhine Lightman. He knew her, she was beautiful, had a good personality, and also ran a beauty salon in the city, and had a high status. The Duke said he had heard a lot about her, and the nickname Flower of the Empire was clearly given to her for a reason. He really wanted to ignore the daughter of the aristocrat who attacked him, but the number of attacks could only increase, so he decided it was better not to provoke them again, and yet he had to go back. He couldn't keep Faye waiting, and so the Duke said that it was late, and he had to go back. The girl was upset about it, but the man took her hand beautifully and said that he hoped that tomorrow they would be able to spend more time together, and then he went to the exit. And the aristocrat's daughter just looked at him and said that her task was to get closer to the Duke of Warren. Her father had ordered it, and if he tried to guess that they had sent the assassins, it would not work, because everything was disguised as an attack by the rebels, and so he would not guess, because he had many enemies. This banquet was a good chance for them, and she could not miss it. At the time, she thought that Sir Ilak was the best option, and so she became close to him, but she could not know that the Duke would suddenly appear, as she thought he had died in the war. Her father said that he would deal with Sir Ilak himself, and there was no way around it. Their lives were at stake, and even if she didn't like it, they had no other choice, and now she needed to get closer to him, and they would think about how to neutralize him. Looking at him, the trader's daughter realized that he was quite handsome, even though the business was risky, and so she assured herself that she would definitely make him her own. It was the second day of the banquet, and the girl stood alone waiting for the marquis, but he never showed up. On the third day, she started to worry, and on the fourth day, she was furious. She shouted and screamed, not understanding why he did not come, and then called a servant and ordered him to bribe the Duke's servant, as she needed to know more about him, no matter what it took. A few days later, a report came in, and the Duke's daughter could not believe her ears that he was spending all day with the mute girl he had brought back from the battlefield. But the maid assured her that it was true, as she had observed for several days herself and noticed that the Duke's maid was hardly ever out. It seemed that she was there to learn to write, or just to bring food, but in any case, she was always with the Duke, and she did all his bidding, and she could not let anyone else take possession of him. Later, she called the maid who had met the man to her room and decided to seduce her, asking if the servant who was always with the Duke was not angry with her. Since she said she wanted to be his mistress, she had a chance. She should have already understood what she needed to do to become his mistress. She needed to get his approval, and so she should not have missed this chance, since there might not be another. And when she made her decision, she should let him know. After finishing the conversation, the maid thought about the offer for some time. She was annoyed and not sure whether to accept it, although she would get rid of it anyway. The girl was convinced that if he treated her so well, he would treat her even better. So she would do it, and that nothing could save her, even if she told them. The same evening, the same maid came running to the heroine, assuring her that the Duke was seriously injured, and she needed to go to him quickly. And the girl did not hesitate to ask to show her the way, and the maid handed her a bag of money, assuring her that it was for the doctor, and led her away. Running down the corridor, the heroine was overcome by a strange feeling. She did not know what to do if the owner was badly hurt, but for some reason they were walking down such a dark corridor, even though the owner was supposed to be at the banquet. The maid realized that they were walking too slowly, and if they were late, nothing would happen. So she took the girl by the hand and told her that if they did not hurry, she would have to take responsibility for the death of the Duke, and if she did not want to do that, she should run after her. She didn't want the owner to get in trouble because of her, so she had to go to him as soon as possible. But it was so strange, and she was very uneasy. They went outside, where the maid gave some man money and said that the girl had been abused so much that she needed to be sent somewhere else, and that the poor girl could not speak, so they needed to take care of her. The heroine, realizing that it was a trap, began to wriggle out of it, realizing that she had to get away. And suddenly she managed to get rid of the maid's grip and then started to run away. They wanted to run after her, but for some reason they were attacked by a bird. She was running away and at the same time crying, not knowing where she was going, but as far as possible. But she came across a root and fell to the ground, and when she looked up she saw them, the Duke and the aristocrat's daughter. She was in pain, very much in pain, not from her wounds, but from the way they looked at each other and saw her dirty face. The man, not listening to his companion, approached the heroine and hugged her warmly, asking who had done it. And the abandoned girl began to realize that it was probably the very maid he had cherished so much. She said that she would call her servants to help, but the Duke said that he did not think it was necessary, and so they left, leaving the angry girl alone. She woke up in her room. It was dark, and no one was in sight. She knew she couldn't go to the owner now. She was too weak, and therefore would cause more problems, and she couldn't say anything. They would throw her out if they wanted to. But as much as she would like to say something, after trying, she failed, and she started crying. She started to feel sick, and she was dizzy when she tried to say a word. But that woman, she is beautiful and strong, just like the owner, and they are very suitable for each other, unlike her. And then suddenly the realization came to the heroine that what she felt was not a feeling of devotion at all. A little later, Herzog came to her room, and the girl was already sitting on the floor. He asked her how she felt and what hurt her, realizing that he was too careless, and now she was very traumatized because she had to go through all the time. The heroine just told him that she shouldn't cry because she didn't want him to see it, but her husband immediately knew it was a lie. She made up an excuse so that he wouldn't worry, and despite what she was constantly facing, she still thought of him first. After that, he raised her face to look at her better and said that she was very beautiful. The girl was embarrassed and looked away, and the man suddenly reached out to kiss her, and the heroine noticed it, but did not mind, and gave him her consent. But an instant before their lips were to touch, the Duke realized everything and increased the distance between them, confident that even though it was the first time, it could not be attributed to a simple misunderstanding. The maid thought about how she would have liked it to last longer, but it seemed that he regretted it, that their lips were almost touching. She always felt much better when her master hugged her. She was happy when she felt love that she had never received from anyone before, and at such moments she realized that she was no longer alone, but now it was not enough. She turned to the owner and said that she was scared. She was getting strange around him. Their first meeting did not work out at all, but she thought they became closer after they left that city. The Duke suggested that she would not hate him, but she refused, as she could not understand it herself. Her heart was in great pain, and she could not live normally. He asked her if she really liked him, and when she heard this, she looked away, and the man realized that she was sincere in her feelings. The Duke took it and gently touched her breast, knowing that it was the first time he had touched it. But still he questioned himself whether he could even feel any warm feelings for her, having gone through so much trouble, whether he could allow himself to love someone. The man realized that she seemed to like him, and the girl immediately looked away, which made him realize that these were her sincere feelings, after which he put his hand on her chest and realized that he was touching her for the first time. But the Duke did not understand whether he was allowed to have any feelings for her at all. He had gone through so many troubles, and whether he could afford to love someone after all. He took his hand away from Faye, and at that moment she grabbed onto him, and this time the man could not restrain himself, and so his clothes were taken off almost instantly, after which he took her and threw her onto the bed. Warren was fascinated by her and could not restrain himself, so he tried to take off her clothes, saying that she should not close herself to him, and in a minute he started kissing her. It was a new sensation for the heroine, and so she was very surprised by it, and in a minute the man told her the bad news, namely that it would be even stranger. The girl was incredibly ashamed, but compared to the stroking on the head and hugging, she liked it even more, and she hoped that he would continue to do it. It hurt her, and at the same time it felt good, and at that moment the girl realized that she could no longer live without her master. The next day, the Duke woke up first, and he looked at the girl's face. He did not expect this from such an innocent person, and now he regretted that they had not met earlier. Now he felt much lighter after he stopped holding back, and he also noticed that for some reason he didn't have nightmares when he slept with her, which may have been a coincidence, but he didn't intend to think otherwise. He woke her up, and she was sleepy. And in a moment she saw a naked man in front of her, and at that moment she felt so ashamed that she couldn't even raise her head, which is why he asked if the girl was disgusted to look at him, and to deny him she raised her head, and what she noticed surprised her. The heroine saw a happy owner in front of her. She had never seen him smile like that before, and so she wondered if the man was as happy as she was, and this meant that she could stay with him, and this made her happy, because she wanted to be with him too. At that moment, a servant outside the door said that the bath was ready, to which Herzog assured them that he did not need help, and therefore they could be free now. Faye said that she would do everything herself, but Herzog said that this was not necessary. After these words, he took her in his arms, saying that she was very tired yesterday, and therefore she should not work today. And then they took a bath together. The heroine thought she was already used to this attitude, but her heart was still ready to break when she felt his chest with her back. The heroine said that she wanted to rub his back, after which he hugged her, asked her to sit with him for a while, to which she humbly agreed, and in a few minutes, taking a rag, she began to wash the owner. When he showed her his back, the heroine realized that she had never seen his back so close before. Looking at those scars, she realized that he had to go through hell, and she could not even imagine how much it hurt him if he already had so many scars. She wished that last night he had been as happy as she was, and she also had strange thoughts in her head. She wanted to become more brazen to be his personal consolation. At breakfast, they drank tea together, and the girl realized just by looking at her host that he was so elegant and handsome, even when he was just drinking tea, and now she felt that she looked out of place. At that moment, she tried to drink something similar to him, and at that moment, he said that he had heard that it was good to drink hot when you have an upset stomach, and in surprise, Faye spilled the tea on her hands, as she had no idea how he could have guessed that. After that, he got up and gently wiped her hands with a cloth, assuring her that she shouldn't just take the hot cup with her bare hands, as even a small scratch could leave a scar, and she should be careful with burns, because they scar even worse, and he wouldn't want such beautiful skin to have any wounds. After finishing their morning chores, the two of them went to the carriage, but at the very entrance the man suddenly turned around and took the girl in his arms, and she immediately hid her face behind his back, as she was ashamed of people seeing her being held in his arms like a child. It was the perfect weather to return home, and at that moment, people were already waiting for him at the Duke of Warren's estate, one of whom was already getting worried that he was still not there, even though he was supposed to have already appeared. He was very much looking forward to the meeting, because it meant for this man that he could finally meet someone else, and all this time it was very difficult for him, and this man was the chancellor in charge of the estate, Warren Cho Scallon. There was also a young man standing next to him, who assured him that he understood the man perfectly, since when he was younger, he was only engaged in developing his abilities later, in the enemies who were always hunting him, and then Pan went to war, and because of this he had no time for relationships. The guy's name was Richard Chaser, and he was the commander of the knights in the Warren army, and he was eagerly awaiting the arrival of his lord. With a gleam in his eye, he said that he was incredibly angry when his lord did not take him with him, and now he wanted to show what he had learned in 10 years of brutal training. And then, the gentleman's carriage came into view, from which the Duke himself came out in a moment, with the girl in his arms, saying that they had not seen each other for a long time, and the sight of this picture took away the gift of things, which in a moment was replaced by a shout asking if he had kidnapped the woman. The owner, lowering the girl, said that he did not think the chancellor was so stupid, and the latter breathed a sigh of relief, realized that this was not the case, and at that moment the man suggested that everyone first go inside and introduce the girl in a calm atmosphere, warning that she was mute. Out of the corner of his eye he noticed Richard, who began to get very worried at this look, and it looked like he had finally reached Carl's level, and so he said that the guy looked like he was training very hard. These words made the boy very happy, who assured him that he was very happy to see his master, and then Herzog remembered what the boy was like 10 years ago and realized that the changes were only on the outside. Inside, he remained exactly the same. Going inside, the man wondered where Carl was, and realizing that he wasn't here, he was visibly surprised, as he was supposed to take a shortcut. They had left Florin about 2 months ago, and he should have arrived before them, but it was unlikely that anything could have happened to him, given the guy's abilities. Presumably Carl was hiding from someone, and Herzog was confident that he could handle any situation on his own, especially knowing that he had a lot of soldiers with him. At that moment, the owner noticed that the house was in poor condition, and the chancellor assured him that it was all Count Paul. As soon as the Duke went to war, the Count declared his right to the place of the head of the family on the same day, and therefore no one could do anything to him. Although the man had been entrusted with the management of the place, after several months of the head of the family's absence, the second heir was entitled to take his place, and the owner noticed that the Count seemed to be hoping that he would die, and so he now ordered him to be brought to the Count, since he no longer recognized his home. Richard asked if the lady should also go with him, to which he ordered the stubborn guy to take care of her, and the guy again took everything too seriously, assured that he was ready to die for her, and Warren approached her and asked her to stay with the guy for a while, as he had some business. Meanwhile, the Count was discussing something with a man in his office, and the man suddenly said that he had to go, and then hurriedly left. He saw who came in and had no desire to be a party to this conflict. The Earl looked smugly at his nephew, saying he was glad to see him, but this joy did not extend to the man, and he asked him directly what he was doing here. And at that moment, the tone of the temporary owner changed, and he decided to speak directly that this was no longer the Duke of Warren's house, and it seemed that he had not heard the latest news. The Duke heard gossip that the Count demanded that the entire inheritance should remain with him, and the Count himself confirmed this, adding that it was 10 years ago he had been doing this for so long, and that is why this land came into his possession. Warren didn't get the joke, and ordered him to stop joking around and get out of here, to which Paul went on a screaming rampage, saying that 10 years had passed and no one could challenge it by law. This land was his now, and it was backed by law. At that moment, he was informed that the statute of limitations started from the moment when both parties confirmed it. The Chancellor assured him that the owner, having been at war for the last 10 years, did not know what was happening here, and therefore the expiration date of the inheritance was not legal. Hearing all this, the Duke coldly stated that he had transferred all the powers to manage the estate to the Chancellor, and from now on, this right would be transferred to him again, after which he turned to Chloe, ordering her to compile a list of the damage that the Count had caused over the past 10 years, and then to issue an invoice. Now Paul began to worry, and addressing Herzog by name, he asked him not to do this, pointing to their family tree, and the fact that he was all that his uncle was. He understood that a family tree was a convenient tool when you needed to ask for forgiveness. But for people like him, the word family meant nothing. Then the man became really angry, and with a predatory look, he ordered the Count to never catch his eye again, or he would appeal to the Emperor to officially take up the matter. Having finished with this, the servants began to carry the things to their rightful places, and the master, who assured us that he was feeling much better, added that it must have been difficult to deal with this man. The Chancellor confirmed this, saying that if it had been any other estate, it would have gone bankrupt, because there were parties every day, and now they had a lot of work to do. And when asked if the Count used the owner's bedroom, Paul assured him that he would never have allowed it. The temporary owner loved to party, and so he was given a luxurious room, and he also did not get involved in politics. At this point, the man said that the girl he came with would sleep in the same room with him, to which the assistant assured him that there hadn't even been a ceremony yet, and there was no need to rush into it. And then Warren stopped, then looked at the interlocutor in surprise, making it clear that he didn't understand what he was talking about. They were talking to him about the wedding ceremony, and the master briefly dismissed it, saying that it would not happen. He was not going to get married now, and would not have chosen her even if he had, since he could not make a captive maid his bride. The man asked him not to ask him this question again, and that girl was just a servant to him, which surprised the Chancellor. He could understand that a lot could have changed in 10 years, but he never wanted to share his bedroom with anyone, and even if it was an ordinary night maid, he would not have left the carriage with her, so it was clear that she was not an ordinary servant. Paul decided to ask about the fact that the master had never shared his bed with anyone before, and therefore it would be better to have separate rooms, to which he was told that the man was going to take care of her himself until she got used to the new environment, and so he had no choice but to obey the decision, assuring him that he would begin to prepare the room for the lady. After that, the assistant asked about the girl's status and whether she was a night maid, and the Duke assured her that she was a day maid at first, but he wanted her to become his personal servant, and there were already a few things she had learned. Then the assistant suggested that she be kept as a day servant, and someone else chosen as a personal servant, at which point the Duke stopped and turned around and ordered them to stop talking about Faye, as he did not want anyone to take her job away from her just because she was poor. The Chancellor was puzzled by the last phrase. He knew that it was unlikely that anyone would do that to her, but it seemed that the master had no intention of changing his mind, and so he wondered if the girl would be able to cope with the hatred of others, since special treatment could eventually become poison. Meanwhile, the heroine and the young captain were walking in the yard, where he noticed that the weather was very nice today, and the girl started laughing for some reason, which surprised the guy. She took him by the hand, pointing out that he and the owner were actually very similar, and the boy's first reaction was shock, which was followed by pride, as the gentleman was called the Lion of the Battlefield, and he was a national hero. And now he was being told that he looked like him, and so he shyly assured him that it was not true, and he was still very far from him. In a moment he realized that the Duke was called the Master, and then the girl asked not to speak so formally, saying that she was Faye, and she was the Master's servant, and this shocked the captain, as he still remembered how the Master carried her in his arms, and so he thought that she was dear to him. Richard assured her that this was not the case, and he was just the kind of person who was nice to everyone, after which he asked how she had met the Duke, and the heroine hesitantly said that he had saved her more than once, and then allowed her to become his servant. The boy was happy to hear that his master had not betrayed his expectations, and for hearing something he had not known about him before. But at that moment, the Duke saw them through the window, and he did not like the picture of the boy holding the girl's hands. In a minute he was already in front of them, and the surprised captain saw the angry gentleman, and it scared him. He instantly picked up the heroine in his arms, and then turned to Richard, saying that they hadn't had a sparring match for a long time, and so this evening they would try. And so the order was to prepare a place and wait, to which the guy gladly agreed. Faye said goodbye to the boy, after which the Duke asked her if she liked Richard, and she agreed, assuring him that he was a very good knight, and these words calmed the man down, and so he assured her that the heroine should support his honor, and therefore she should not hold hands with men other than him. Faye happily agreed, remembering that even a subordinate had said that no one should touch her but her master. She belonged to her master, honor, and other men. She must remember this, and never forget it again. Later, people gathered at the entrance to the manor, and the heroine asked who they were, to which she received the answer that they had decided that they were the owners here while the Duke was away, and therefore there was no need to worry about them now. The girl was surprised to ask if they were his family, and the man coldly replied that they had only blood in common, and sometimes they were even worse than strangers, so he should not have any warm feelings for them. She thought that family was always about special people, and even though her mother had to live in a separate house for her sake, she still told her every time how much she loved her, and so she always thought that families should be loyal to each other. The owner assured the girl that it was not the fact that they shared the same blood that was important, but their attitude towards each other. He understood that being responsible for someone was troublesome, but it strengthened their relationship. His duties had always been a duty, and so they were only tiring, but for her he had taken responsibility of his own free will, although he could not give her what she wanted. But he knew how much it pleased her when he held her, and now the man could not stop any longer. Later they had dinner together, and the maids who were watching were shocked, as they were sure that the girl was just a regular night maid. But for some reason, she was now sitting at the same table with the master. The heroine was clumsily wielding a fork and knife, and the Duke noticed her efforts and helped a little, assuring her that she should eat well, as the meat was sufficiently cooked, and she listened to him without hesitation. It seemed to her that she and her host were getting closer. Maybe he didn't say anything special, but for some reason she felt so good. And when he finished, he said that it was time to go, and when she asked where, he took her in his arms and said that after the meal they needed to move a little. The next day, Richard was sitting on the stairs, remembering yesterday with horror. The Duke said he wanted to test his skills, but it seemed that was not the reason, and everything was just like 10 years ago. The boy was only getting beaten, and now he was beating himself up for probably doing something wrong, and this made the man angry. At this point, the guy was asked what he was doing here, and he turned around and saw Chloe coming out of the house, and he assured him that he was just resting after sparring, to which the man assured him that he had heard about it, as if the guy had been beaten badly. The guy noticed that he himself looked tired, and he said with sadness in his eyes that he had a lot to deal with and to do, and the captain supported the man in his heavy duties. Later, he cautiously asked if he was the only one who thought it was strange that the Duke had brought that girl with him. It seemed as if they had a strange relationship, and Richard realized that if it was true, there would be trouble, as he had taken her hand very carelessly. They slept on the same bed, ate together, and it was like the girl didn't work at all, and no maid would be allowed to do that. And then the captain suggested that she might be some daughter of the emperor that he was hiding or something. The chancellor interrupted him, ordered him to watch his tongue, as they had no right to discuss it, and now they should restrain their curiosity, and they would find out about all this when Carl returned, who for some reason had been gone for a very long time. Meanwhile, in some remote tavern, they scolded one of the girls who worked there, saying that she was useless, and pointing to the dirty dishes, ordered her to wash them, as food residues were visible, and then pointed out that she had nothing but a pretty face. The girl convinced herself that she needed to calm down and keep her temper, even if it was hard and scary. Despite the fact that they were left without pride, they needed to earn money, otherwise they would die without it. And now she knew what it was, suffering and overwhelming loneliness. That's how Faye felt. She first met the girl on the day her mother died. The woman shouted at the then young girl, saying that even after that she would not join their family, and she should be grateful, at least for the fact that they gave her food and shelter, and now she should not even hang around them. At the time, she didn't know that Faye was an illegitimate child, but even if she had, nothing would have changed, and she would have avoided seeing her again, and all she remembered about that girl now was that she always cried. Although, after a moment, she remembered that she did remember Faye smiling at her once. She had bumped into the girl when she was crying in the annex, and that was the first time they had talked. She was angry that no one had told Faye about that day. That day she was quite abrupt when she was teaching her, because she was angry and couldn't calm down, and when she was dressing her, she assured her that she shouldn't worry about it, and just do as she was told. And at that moment Faye smiled. Her expression was somehow awkward, as if it was the first time she smiled at someone. Then she wanted to feel sorry for her and talk to her, but she was afraid that her parents might find out about it. And only now she realized that from the moment she started feeling sorry for her, she should have realized that this was her younger sister, and not abandoned her. She should not have left this child alone. While serving the customers, she noticed a familiar pattern on them. She recognized them as imperial knights, and now she didn't need to attract any extra attention to avoid being recognized. And suddenly she was caught by the arm, which scared her terribly, and the beastman asked if she shouldn't be with the gentleman, and the girl, not understanding the question, asked to be let go. And hearing the voice, the guy let her go, apologizing for it, as he had confused her with another person. The girl instantly hurried away from them, assuring them to call her when they chose their order. But the guy stopped her, and turning his face to her, he said that they looked very much alike. The girl saw the Warhammer emblem with horror in her eyes, and realized that these imperial knights belonged to them, and if his master was now with a man who looked like her, it could only mean that she was still alive. Meanwhile, at the table, the Duke handed the heroine a bag, saying that it was a salary, and there were 12 gold and 60 silver coins for 3 months. The girl did not know what to do with them, and the owner assured her that she could buy something for herself, or let her save if she did not know what to spend it on. In this case, The heroine handed this bag to the man, uncertainly saying that she was giving this money to him. He was pleased with this gift, but still assured that it was her money and she needed to spend it, and there was no point in giving back what he had just handed her. Faye thought about it, and in a minute she said that she wanted to buy a gift. The girl asked what kind of gift the owner would like, and he assured her that he would be happy to receive anything, as long as it was from her. But most of all, he wanted to do something like that with her. The heroine was walking through the streets of the city with a large basket of fruit. Before the trip, she claimed that she could manage on her own. But she was so captivated by the conversations of the traders that she ended up buying a lot of unnecessary things, and now she did not know what to do next, and at this rate she would be tired before she got to the manor. At that moment, a suspicious man approached her, asking if she needed help. As the basket looked quite heavy, he scared the heroine, and she turned away and tried to get away from him. He didn't intend to leave so easily, so he tried to grab her, but at that moment a familiar guy, Richard, caught him by the arm with seriousness in his eyes and asked if he had any business with his companion, to which he ran away in fear. The captain thought he had figured it out, but it turned out that it was indeed Miss Faye, and now he asked what business she had come to town for, picking up a basket to help. He couldn't read lips, so she had to write on the letter that she was looking for a gift for the owner, and this surprised Richard. He couldn't believe that the heroine was let go all alone and without any escort, and at that moment, he saw from the corner of his eye that behind their backs, someone in a cloak was giving a spanking to the same stranger. And at that moment, the boy realized that he was right, as he thought they had a very unusual relationship, and so he would use this opportunity to earn points for Miss Faye. Now the young captain was determined. He assured her that he would help her, and she should leave the choice of a gift to him, and the girl thanked him sweetly, assuring him that she would be very grateful, unless of course he had other things to do. The first suggestion was a metal bracelet, as it can be ordered, and the result was beautiful, to which the heroine said that she would like to buy a gift right now. The evening came, and the girl returned to the Duke's room, bringing with her a basket, saying that she had bought a lot of fruit today. Although she hadn't thought to take it today, she still had 12 gold pieces left. The man did not shout at her, and treated the situation with understanding, assuring her that traders would not be able to survive and feed themselves if they did not keep their mouths shut. After a moment, he asked if she needed anything else, and the heroine uncertainly took out a notebook from the basket and handed it to the master, and inside was a leaflet with a thank you note for taking care of her. He was happy to receive it, so he assured her that he would use it with pleasure, and these words made the girl happy, after which he reminded her that she said she regretted buying so much fruit, so he said that they could always be used and not even eaten, and the Duke assured her that he would teach her interesting games with fruit. The next day, he was working as usual in his office, holding the gift with one hand, looking at it, feeling good about himself, and at that moment, he heard a question from Richard, who had been standing there in a half-crouch for some time, asking how much longer he needed to stand like that. The owner said that he would tell him to stop when the time came, noting that it seems that the guy who could become a commander, when difficulties arise, pretends to be difficult. From these words, the guy lit up even more, and cheerfully said that he was not difficult at all, and he could stand like that for eternity. He was wearing a piece of jewelry around his waist, and the man remembered that Faye had given it to him, so he asked why he was wearing it now, and the boy blissfully said that he was doing it to emphasize his eternal devotion and gratitude to the ruler, and so he decided to wear it on his chest for the rest of his life. The Duke noticed that the boy seemed to be loyal only to him, but for some reason he put on this thing that Faye had given him. It looked like his brain was also made of muscles, and so, exhaling heavily, he ordered him to stop and leave. Left alone, he was thinking about what he should do with the girl. He told her that she was his personal servant. But usually personal servants are not only engaged in various small matters, but also do a great job with official business. But still, Faye wouldn't be able to do that, because she hadn't even fully learned writing yet. And even though he wanted her to be in his sight all the time, and even more, if she got closer to someone else and her worldview became broader, there would be room in her heart for someone other than him. The thought made him angry. Some time passed. The heroine was in the Duke's office studying writing, and at that moment she caught herself thinking that it was all rather strange. Before coming here, she had been more involved in Maid's chores. Now she was dressing him in clothes that someone else chose and studying writing while the master was working. And at night, they went to bed together, and that was it. The girl tried to do her best, but it didn't save her from the envious stares of others, and now she just wanted to work like everyone else. That's why she went up to address the owner and ask him when she could go to work, which surprised the man, but no more. He said he would teach her everything she needed when the time came. The waiting was torturous for her, and so she wanted to know when that time would come. He praised the heroine for her desire, but assured her that right now there was no need to increase the number of her duties, but she was nagged by the question of whether she was really doing good with her work. The Duke stood up, saying that she was a good girl and had been behaving well lately, which meant that she should be rewarded, and so he gave her a beautiful necklace. The maid did not want to accept it, saying that it was too undeserved for her, but the owner reassured her, saying that it was nothing for him, as he could give her as much as she wanted, and therefore she should not worry about it. But this was not what worried the girl. All this was not a merited favor of the master, for which she could not repay on her own, and this made her feel, and these feelings remained in her soul. But still the answer she could give was only gratitude. She could not repay him with anything else. The Duke at once threw her on the table and began to kiss her, when suddenly someone told him that he had a visitor. The man said that he had not heard that anyone was supposed to come today, to which he received the answer that it was a sudden visit. And because of this, he did not intend to receive such rude visits, and because of this, he ordered him to send him back. And at that moment, he was informed that Duke Lightman's daughter had come, and this surprised him. He did not understand what she was thinking when she showed up like this, because even if the Duke himself had come here, he would have been sent back. And in the end, if she wanted to meet him so badly, he had no choice but to invite her. And so the Duke's daughter appeared before them, absolutely confident. She went inside, casting a contemptuous glance at the maid for a second, and then assured them that they hadn't seen each other for a long time. The owner pretended that he was seeing her for the first time, so he asked if they had met somewhere before, and was reminded that their meeting had taken place in the imperial palace, and so he asked what the girl had come to see him about. Pointing to the maid, the aristocrat assured her that this was not a conversation for other people's ears, and at that moment, suddenly for everyone, the man said that in this case they would have to talk next time. Coming closer to Faye, he claimed to be busy, showing his attitude towards her with his whole appearance, which angered the guest. And then he ordered the chancellor to give the lady a room to rest. On the way to the room, she wondered why this had happened, why his attitude toward her had changed so much. And in a moment she realized that Duke Warren might have learned that the aristocrats had sent a hired killer to him. But at the same moment she repelled this thought, arguing that a killer with extreme training could not possibly have told everything. And then she had another guess. Perhaps he had learned that she wanted to kill that maid. And this fact annoyed the girl. She realized that the Duke of Warren was no fool, so he would marry someone who would match his status, and she herself was the only one who would match it. Carl showed up that day, and the owner looked at him carefully. He wanted to ask him why it took him so long to get here, but it seems he was late because he was trying to put all this on and then come here. The guy assured him that since he didn't think he should be involved in Miss Faye's affairs without permission, he was still angry, and asked why the Duke's body was completely covered in the girl's scent. And then the man remembered that Carl was a bestiality, and therefore he was extremely sensitive to such smells. He had realized this since he had been forbidden to approach her, and this meant that at that moment, he was interrupted by the girl he had brought here, who apologized for interrupting this dialogue, assuring him that she understood how tactless and unconscionable it was, but she asked to be allowed to meet Faye at least once more. When Carl finished, he was walking on business when two people stopped him in the corridor. One was the Chancellor, and he did not recognize the other, who introduced himself as Richard, and then he realized how much he had changed. The assistant assured him that they should talk elsewhere, and after retreating to a secluded spot, he asked directly if Carl knew anything about the relationship between Herzog and Faye, and he thought as soon as he entered the office, her scent immediately hit his nose. But the smell was not so strong, as if it had accumulated over a day or two. The beast man warned them right away that if they intended to separate them by force, it would not work, and they should abandon the idea. Even if he looked completely calm, this was a man who had been broken by a long and bloody war. If someone touches one of his loved ones, to whom he feels a mania for control and protection, will he be able to withstand all the consequences later? And besides, she was the first person he allowed to be near him. The Chancellor assured me that he had no such thoughts. The Duke wanted to make Faye his personal servant, and everyone listened to him. But their current relationship went beyond that. Carl didn't know what to say, because he couldn't know all of the gentleman's intentions, and even if he did, he could hardly do anything about it. And now it seemed that they could only look on from the sidelines. That night, the guest that Carl had brought went out to the balcony and thought she didn't know what to do next. In the afternoon, they managed to meet with her sister, and they didn't know how to start this dialogue from the beginning. So the older sister made the first step by asking how she had been doing all this time. During all this time, Faye went through many difficulties and terrible things. She was able to get away from this loneliness in that annex. She met the owner and finally managed to feel human warmth, and now she was happy. The older one breathed a sigh of relief, saying she was happy for her, adding that she had come here to say something really important. And after a moment of reflection, she said that the girl was not to blame for being born. Faye was told all her life that she shouldn't have been born and that her existence was terrible. But now her sister was assuring her that it wasn't her fault and that it wasn't a sin to be born. The heroine knew that she had made her mother's life painful and had also caused wounds and misery to her father's family. She thought that her very existence was a mortal sin. The girl apologized for talking about it all just now. She knew she didn't deserve to be forgiven, but she still wanted to tell her. A deathly silence fell, and after a few seconds, Faye took her hand, assuring her that everything was fine. The heroine did not feel anger or hatred. If she had not been abandoned that day, she would not have met the master. If that painful time was a journey to meet the master, if all this was a payment in advance for the present happiness, then everything was fine. And now she was happy. Seeing the sincere happiness in her sister's eyes, the girl could not find the right words. They had left her, turned away from her, and now they did not deserve this sincere smile. And at that moment, the elder hugged her beloved sister tightly. She thought she would be scolded, thought she would be chased away and refused to meet, but she consoled her, and these emotions made her cry bitterly. That same evening, after the conversation between the sisters ended, a gentleman in the room asked Faye if they had a good conversation, and she cried, explaining that everyone said that her birth was a mistake, and she thought she was bad. But her sister said that it was not her fault that she was born, and so now she was incredibly happy. The Duke could not understand this. He asked if she could forgive this person just because she said it. Despite the fact that she was now asking for forgiveness, it did not change all that suffering then, and if she wanted to, he was ready to make sure that the girl never saw her sister again. But to his surprise, the heroine assured him that everything was fine because she was able to meet her master, and therefore she forgave all the difficulties she had experienced. So now it was much easier for her. The man couldn't think of any other confession that could be so inspiring. It turns out that she now lives in a cage from which she cannot get out, and sees only him, considers him special, and now she would like her sister to be happy as well. Inspired by this confession, the man picked up the heroine in his arms, laid her down on the bed in a moment, and suggested that she stop thinking about others. She did not know what others he was talking about, and if they were others, what was their relationship with the master, and could she expect just a little bit that they could have a special relationship? My sister was now aware of her current state. She had lost everything, her home, her family, her status, a sense of loss and sadness from the loss of her family, as well as a sense of disappointment in herself, cowardly and untalented, and even stronger remorse, all of which choked her to the point where she wanted to die. But now she met Faye, and this dialogue stopped her suffering. Suddenly she noticed Carl walking under the balcony, and in a moment he was on the balcony next to her, thus shocking the girl. She asked in fear what he was doing here, and the guy said that he was called first, and the girl said that she had not called him to talk, so he could leave, and then turned away ostentatiously. The guy asked her if she was going to run away from here, As I was telling him, his gut instincts told him, and after a little bit of thinking, the girl turned around and said that she might be late, but she was grateful to be allowed to meet Faye. Now she was wondering what would happen to her, to which she received the answer that everything that could happen to her would depend only on her. And this shocked the girl, since she knew that as an aristocrat from a conquered country, she should only be executed. But the guy was not the owner of the place, so he could not know that. So he asked if she was important enough to be caught and executed, which meant that she could finally be free, and a new life awaited her. The girl argued that everyone should know why she couldn't stay with her sister, and Carl realized that she would leave, and the moment she left Warren, she would be dealt with immediately and quietly, and he didn't like that. Suddenly, the beast man grabbed her hand and assured her that she had nowhere else to go, so she could just stay here, and after that statement, he bit the girl. The girl screamed out in indignation, hitting him with her hand, after which she asked him to leave her immediately, and the guy realized that the bite had left a mark, and if she tried to escape, she would be found immediately. Carl said that as soon as she gave up on the idea of leaving Warren, he would back off, and then added that she shouldn't try to run away from her own feelings of guilt, especially when she felt them towards her sister, because she was now the only family she had. At that moment, she realized that he had no idea what the people who belonged to the Schock family did to her, and after all that, she could not be called a family to Faye. Now he was offering to take her side unconditionally, for the sake of her becoming a real big sister to her, at least from that moment on. And she realized that even in such a miserable and disgusting country, if her sister wanted her to stay with her as a big sister, she had no other choice. In a moment, Carl, having achieved the desired answer, thanked her for the conversation, and hurriedly disappeared from sight, leaving her alone with her thoughts. Faye had grown up all her life as her shadow. But now, if she needed her even a little bit, this time she would be her shadow. Later, the Beastman was already in the Duke's office, and reported on the situation, to which he was not satisfied, as his orders were again disobeyed. But the captain was ready to accept any punishment, as Mrs. Faye said she wanted to be with her sister. This surprised the owner. She had been living perfectly well without a family, but now she suddenly needed one, and this angered the man. He realized that Carl, knowing that he would not get permission, had gone to the girl first, because he knew perfectly well that he would not be able to refuse her. It seemed that the Duke was being ruled by using the girl, wishing to bring other people into her life besides him. He knew that not so long ago, Faye had wanted to get rid of the past completely and become happy, and these words did not leave his mind. In the end, he agreed. He allowed the girl to be hired as a maid, on the condition that she should not cross the line again. Already out the door, the guy breathed a sigh of relief, as he had expected the worst, and now it was probably worth sitting quietly for a while. Meanwhile, the guest was in the garden, and was incredibly angry, waiting for the Duke to come to her at last. She had been here for several days and had never seen the owner. Then she remembered the maid she had seen when she first arrived here. She was still running around him as she had then, but the other servants could not approach him so easily. It seemed that Duke Warren had fallen in love with this stupid maid who couldn't even speak. She knew it would be just a momentary infatuation, but on the other hand, he had left her for some reason, instead holding someone like her to his side, and it was haunting her. And at that moment, by a happy accident, she saw Faye in the garden, and at that moment a plan appeared in her head. She bumped into her shoulders, so that the maid fell to the ground. The aristocrat assured her that she was thinking, and therefore did not notice her. When she saw that she had injured her hand, she gave her her handkerchief, realizing that up close she looked even more pitiful, and such a girl would find a place to die if left alone. Leaving her this handkerchief, she turned around and left, the heroine looking at her back, thinking that girl was so kind and beautiful, without a single flaw. She was the one who would be best suited to the owner, and he would most likely fall in love with her as well. A moment later, her sister, who had become a servant, came to her and saw that she had fallen and helped her up, looking with one eye at the person who had done it. It was Rhine Lightman. She was the Duke's daughter, who could marry Warren. Everyone in this estate knew that Faye was a maid from a defeated country who spent her nights in the Duke's chambers, and so the Duchess must also be aware, and if she became the mistress of this house, she would definitely deal with it, although perhaps the Duke would deal with it even faster. The Duke, who had led many countries to ruin, was not foolish enough to leave something that could be reproached before the wedding. Now she stood precariously in a world strewn with lies, as if she were walking a tightrope. Now she was going to deal with everything. So she asked Faye directly if she was happy now, and she did not hesitate to assure her that she was happy, because she had the opportunity to be with her master, and her sister at the same moment said that she still should not give her heart to him completely. The heroine assured her that she knew what she was going through. She also understood that one day she would have to end her relationship with the owner. This statement terrified the sister, as she knew that it would be the end, but she still kept smiling. The girl asked if the Duke knew about her feelings and received an uncertain answer, and wondered what he wanted in that case. Maybe he just wanted to play and leave her, despite the fact that he knew about her feelings, and maybe he had another plan. Meanwhile, a messenger from the Emperor arrived at the Duke's house and ordered him to enter, and once inside, he said that as a reward for his victory, the man would receive 10 golden carts and the virgins of 1,000 selected slaves. The Emperor also personally sent a sword, which he said was the best on the entire continent, and he asked to hang it as a memento. Looking at it, the war hero immediately realized that it was made of rare materials, and so he decided to hang it right in his office. The messenger also added that the crown prince had finished dealing with the remains of the defeated people and returned to the palace, so in 3 or 4 months, a big celebration in his honor will be held. The master realized that he would probably have to return to the capital by then, and in the meantime he ordered a room to be prepared for the messenger, who must have been tired after a long journey. After finishing his business, the man began to ask the chancellor about his aristocratic guest, but did not learn anything special, and then he was informed that the Duchess had recently hung around Faye, and then asked what he was going to do next. The Duke asked if he should kill her, but when the assistant began to worry, he assured him that it was just a joke. No matter how much she got on his nerves, he was not going to use brute force, as she would die anyway, even if she didn't interfere, and so he shouldn't create any more problems for himself. Suddenly, while examining the sword, the warrior noticed a letter inside the scabbard, and inside was a message to the Duke of Warren, which stated that he was aware that Mrs. Lightman had taken up residence in his house, and he himself would like to ask to take care of her for a while. It looked like a personal letter from the prince, and judging by the fact that he had sent this message secretly, he still couldn't use the chance to destroy Duke Lightman. If he found out about all the bad deeds of their family, Warren would immediately order him to chop off his limbs, and thus he would only attract attention. The man would like to refuse him, but the duty of life is heavy, and so now he asked where the Duchess was. Meanwhile, she cried into her pillow. The aristocrat did not understand the point of dressing nicely now. She simply had no one to do it for, because that person had not visited her for some time, and instead, she constantly ran into only stupid, scary people. Seeing herself in the mirror, she realized that this look did not suit her, and in a moment she calmed herself down, assuring herself that she would get him in the end, and she would no longer have to worry about that girl next to him, because she always got what she wanted, and the Duke was no exception. Besides, when such men fall in love, they become very passionate. Her thoughts were interrupted by the maid, who informed her that the Duke of Warren had come and found her in a different form, and she decided at first that she could not show herself like that in front of him, but changed her mind, because if she refused to meet him now, she might not get another chance. So she quickly threw something on and allowed him to come in, and in a few minutes they were drinking tea. The man said he thought she had come to his house on business, but in the end she made him make the first move, and after a moment his tone became more serious, and he suggested that they not waste any more time and get right down to business. The aristocrat assured him that now that he had returned to his homeland, it was time to think about his heirs, and so she came with a marriage proposal, which only made the host smile, and he pointed out that the faction to which he belonged was very different from the one in which their family was. And then the girl pointed out that the compensation for 10 years of war was not enough, thus enraging the man across from her. After which, she said that she could bring him great power and benefit more than anyone else in the country. He thought about this suggestion, then stood up, assured her that he would send a servant to help her if she needed anything, and left the room to go about his business. Meanwhile, the maid sister was looking after the sleeping Faye, and she was horrified by what she saw. There were many bruises on the girl's neck, as well as teeth marks. She could not believe that a person who seemed to value honor, reputation, and authority above all else could leave such marks on the girl's body. Exhaling heavily, she said that maybe the girl was a night maid, but it was all too much. And at that moment the heroine grabbed her hand, asking what a night maid was, and whether there could be ordinary maids and night maids. This question surprised the older one. Faye did not know who the night maids were, because she had only ever spent time in the Duke's bedroom, and now she said she knew nothing about it. And so she asked if the heroine was an ordinary maid, to which she received the answer that the girl was the Duke's personal maid. And this made her worry, because it could mean that their countries represented maids differently. But in a moment, she convinced herself that this could not be the case. But still, for some reason, the Duke's attitude towards her could not be called normal. The older one asked the girl not to overwork for a while, and if necessary, let her fake an illness. She knew that if this continued, the girl could get pregnant, and then this relationship would end. Then when he left her unilaterally, he used her the way he wanted to, just because he saved her, and it was cruel. After finishing here, the maid left the room, finally asking the patient to sleep a little, and left alone. The heroine thought about what she had heard about pregnancy, the master, her and the child. Faye understood that it was all true, that she would not be able to become a family with him, and he knew it perfectly well, so she should not suffer so much. The place where she slept every day began to feel so unfamiliar, like a place she should not be. She did not know what to do next. Meanwhile, the master and his assistant were discussing the matter of where the future slaves would live. The man assured them that if all the problems were not solved now, they would have problems in the winter, and therefore it was necessary to mobilize them to build a house for them, and then send them to work on the estate, and some to military needs. When he finished, he went to his room, realizing that he had been working hard lately. Their connection in the last few days had been so passionate that it seemed as if he had to put a little more force into it, she would break. And after that, it was clear why she was sick. The immediate things had been done, and so it was time to find out how Faye was doing. To his surprise, he met the Duchess at the entrance to the room and immediately asked her what she was doing here, and she assured him that she had assumed he was finishing up at that time, and so she came to offer him a walk in the backyard. The man was going to visit Faye, but he was still asked to take care of Lady Lightman, and so he had no choice but to ask that in the future she give him invitations through the servant he had assigned to her. The heroine, meanwhile, came to get some air outside. It was much better there than in the stuffy bedroom. She was still holding the handkerchief, and realized that she should return it to the owner as soon as possible, as it was probably an important and valuable thing, judging by the delicate scent of her body, which it was impregnated with. She knew that her smell was not as good as the one he was wearing, and therefore the smell of flowers would be much more pleasant for her. But suddenly she heard a strange laugh, and thinking it was a guest, she hurried to her to give her the handkerchief. The girl heard the aristocrat's voice, and a moment later the owner's. It seemed that they were having an easy and fun time. And realizing this, the heroine turned around and ran away in a hurry. She finally realized. She understood why he told her not to have feelings for him anymore, because he knew how much it hurt. Night fell, and Faye returned to her room. Sitting by the window, she reflected. Nothing had changed after all. Just as in the past she waited for her father to come, she was waiting for her master now. Even though she had become his personal maid, she thought that much had changed since her last meeting with him. But it was not the case. At that moment, he appeared, the master she had been waiting for. Now the girl could touch him. He took just a few steps, but in the end he was too far away. They just looked at each other, and the heroine felt uncomfortable with this look. Herzog's face looked as if he was about to disappear, and so she hugged him as tightly as she could for a minute, and he asked if anything had changed and how she was feeling now. The man realized that he had only imagined it. Judging by the way she hugged him, it was good that she was doing well without him, although a little bit offensive, and now he said that he would be having dinner with a guest, and so she would have to be alone for a while. Faye stood motionless, smiling strangely. This expression confused the master. He could not remember her making such a face at least once, and he could not know what she could be thinking about now. So he asked if she wanted to tell him something and should not hide it. The heroine said that she also wanted to work, just like the others and her sister, and this statement upset the man. He asked why she needed the extra trouble, since she hardly needed anything now. And then the thought came back to him that she really wanted to fill her world with something other than him. The heroine assured him that she would like to be the best maid for him, and these words calmed him down. So he said that it was enough that she was by his side. The man understood that she had never asked for anything first, but if she wanted it so much, he would have to let her. The next day, the owner entrusted her training to his assistant, and they started right away. The man explained that a maid should always help her master, take care of clothes, food, daily routine, and other things, as well as help in everyday life and work. These words stuck in her head, as she did not understand what she had been doing all this time, and the teacher continued to explain, assuring her that unlike an aide who cared only about external and internal affairs, a maid should devote all her time to the master. The girl was still immersed in her thoughts. All she had done so far was just wait for him in the bedroom, and she was ashamed that she had considered herself a maid all this time. She realized that she needed to start at least now, even if they would not become one family. But if she was useful to the owner, she would at least be able to be near him, and so she would indeed become a maid. The chancellor looked at the thoughtful girl and exhaled heavily. The training was entrusted to him, not the head maid, and that meant he did not want her to work. The Duke had more work, and it seemed he was ready to do anything to control her life. Meanwhile, at breakfast, the Duchess suggested a banquet, as she thought it was time to show them off to the public. But the husband assured her that there were more important things to do now than banquets, and he had many things to do. The aristocrat confirmed this, adding that now was still the right time to warn those who were pretending to be important people here, and she knew that if she were to greet guests at the banquet with the Duke, gossip about her being the future Duchess would spread very quickly. After some thought, he assured her that he would think about it, added that the afternoon tea party would have to be postponed due to business, and she kissed him goodbye, after which she left him alone. Later in the office, the assistant reported that many people had come to Torres, including Mr. Mano Lightman, and he was told that the money was in the hands of mercenaries, and Herzog realized that Mano would catch them very soon. The man knew that Mano was probably panicking right now, looking for the money. He probably thought he needed the money to become a swordmaster and confront Warren, and he didn't even realize that this was a trap that would kill him. The man noticed that the Duchess had made him an interesting offer, namely to organize a banquet in honor of his return. The assistant confirmed that now was a good time for this. The only problem was that the Duke's daughter Lightman was still in the manor. After that, the Chancellor asked if they were engaged by any chance, and when she said no, he asked why she was trying to look like his future bride. Her behavior was very rude, and he realized it when she showed up uninvited. The Duke of Warren suggested that the banquet should be held this month, but he was not going to go along with it, so he ordered that everything be arranged as the assistant himself would decide. And then he was reminded that there were other requests from the prince, but he said for a while, but did not specify. In the end, it was time to put an end to these jokes. At that time, the heroine entered the aristocrat's room to give her a handkerchief, and the guest decided to meet her personally, and after a minute, she assured her that she hated to say it herself, but she hoped that the girl would understand. The Duchess said that she understood everything, and there was nothing strange about the Duke keeping the girl as a pet. These words shocked the heroine, and the aristocrat noticed this reaction and smiled viciously, adding that they, aristocrats, sometimes get bored and get pets, cats, dogs, or strange creatures. After these words, the girl fell into deep thought. She knew that she had been pretending to be a maid until now, but she had no idea that others might see her as a kind of pet. The Duchess said that she understood how hard it was to hear, but as the Duke's future wife, she was also not entirely happy to see her all the time, and especially since someone like her would not be able to get him anyway. And so she hoped that the heroine would return the man to her, as well as the handkerchief. At that moment, the servant said that the girl had received a letter from home, and she ordered them to bring it, while letting the heroine go, and after reading it, the girl visibly cringed. It said that this fool, Ilak Renhuber, still could not accept their separation and continued to hang around her parents' house, which made her angry, as she expected to be left alone. When evening came, the Duke returned to the room and saw Faye lying in complete darkness, so he sat down next to her and asked what had happened, as it was obvious that she was in a bad mood. She stood up, feeling his gentle hands. It was enough for her to be touched, but now her heart was broken, and she reluctantly started to cry. The man noticed this and asked her what was wrong. The heroine asked the owner if she was really a pet, and this question shocked the Duke. He could not expect such words, and therefore did not know what to say, and the girl took his silence as a consent. He did not deny that she was a pet, and it seems that the aristocrat was right. It was true, and she was a pet. Faye fell to her knees and began to cry bitterly. The owner had nothing to say to her, and so he claimed that he had business to attend to, and so she would have to sleep alone, and with that, he left the girl alone with her own grief. All this time she thought that just being near him, an unusual creature, would be enough to relieve her boredom. She should have been satisfied with that, but she was worried that her husband might get bored with her and want to lock her up somewhere, just like her father had said, and now she was praying for someone to tell her what to do in this situation. In his office, the Duke immediately called the maid he had assigned to the aristocrat and asked her directly if this was all the lady's tricks. When he received the affirmation, he asked why he had not been informed immediately, and the woman assured him that she had been told not to report such petty matters to him. The owner said in a threatening tone that she should not decide what was important and what was not, and that in the future she should immediately report to him everything related to them both, and in parting, ordered her to tell the lady that he would be very busy and therefore unable to see her. Left alone, he thought deeply, remembering the pet. These words seemed to hit him in the weak spot. He told Faye that it was not true, but he knew that he was to blame for the fact that she had nothing to say to these words. No matter how you hide your nature, no matter what masks you use, you will still feel awkward in your behavior. He didn't know how to hide the fact that he was not as good a person as the girl thought he was. The more she talked to other people, the sooner she would realize how spoiled he was, and then she would start avoiding him, and maybe even run away from him. Maybe she had already realized his cruel and horrible nature. A day passed, and the heroine was returning from another lesson, recalling how she was told that if you eat in a hurry, you can get an upset stomach, and the same with studying. If you rush, you won't understand what you've learned. Returning at night, the man saw the heroine sitting silently on the bed. Taking her hand, he asked her not to do it again, as it was not her concern, and she should not do it. Getting up, she apologized, and said that she still wanted to work like the others. The heroine understood that the master would return to her place, regardless of her feelings, and when this happened, she would return to where she should be. And there was no place for her here, and she was nothing more than a pet for the master. After the wedding, he would no longer need her. Unnecessary people are kept as far away as possible until they are needed again, and if she still has to sit locked up all the time, waiting for the master. At this point, the heroine cheered herself up. She couldn't spend all her time studying. She needed to know what she could do right now to become a useful person as soon as possible. Surprised, the maid lost the gift of the thing, and after a moment she clarified whether the girl really wanted to learn her job, as she did not understand why a night maid would learn the work of a maid. The heroine heard this word again, that sister, that everyone said it to her, but she never knew what it meant. The woman asked why she needed a personal maid, asked to teach her the duties of a maid, because she was a night maid. The heroine wrote that this was not true, to which she said that there was no need to deny it when it was true. Those who were constantly in the master's bedroom were night maids, and would a maid share a room with a master, and even dress as brightly as she did? Suddenly, a scream was heard, and the maid turned around in a hurry, saying that she had to leave, and she asked the girl to go back to the bedroom and not to do anything stupid. Left alone, the heroine realized that all this time she was just a night maid for the master. She was his pet, and therefore they thought she was useless, and because of this, she was abandoned, and therefore she could not proudly call herself a maid, which made her disgusted. A minute later, the heroine heard a clear question asking what she was doing here, and when she looked up, she saw the owner, surrounded by his subordinates, and he repeated his question with a rude tone, asking who made her do it. When he did not receive an answer, he ordered the senior maid to take the girl and treat her, and then lock her in his bedroom so that she would not go anywhere. The girl broke away from the woman's arms and grabbed the Duke's cloak with her dirty hands, after which she claimed that she was in the wrong, and therefore she begged him not to leave her. Turning around, he asked if she understood at all what she was in the wrong for, namely that she could not sit quietly in the room, after which he took her hand away from her and left. Returning at night, the man saw the heroine sitting silently on the bed. Taking her hand, he asked her not to do it again, as it was not her concern and she should not do it. Getting up, she apologized and said that she still wanted to work like the others. These words angered her husband once again. He offered her a quiet life, but for some reason she refused it and tried to go the hard way, and he did not understand it, to which she assured him that it was not about that. She just wanted to show that she could also do something, and she could be useful. She wanted recognition. The Duke looked at her fiercely, and in the same tone asked why she was tired of living with him and wanted to do something else, which was fine. But he didn't need workers right now. Faye realized at that moment that this was her job. Her only task that her master allowed her to perform was to serve him in the bedroom at night. And now it seemed that she was wrong. She thought that he would perceive her differently if she worked like everyone else. She thought that she could be there for him. But it turned out to be completely different.